From deadly diseases to exploding planets, here are 5 science experiments that went horribly wrong. In 1912, a scientist at the University of Pennsylvania named William Thomas Green Morton was trying to synthesize a new chemical compound, but instead ended up creating a deadly gas. While heating up a mixture of chemicals, he noticed that it began to smoke and fume, so he quickly attached a delivery tube to a glass bulb filled with sulfuric acid to collect the fumes. But the next day he found that the bulb had shattered, and an amount of the gas he collected was released into the lab, killing several birds that were nearby. And when his assistant inhaled some of the gas, he too became very ill. Though he did survive, he never fully recovered and spent the last 15 years of his life in an insane asylum. But this wasn't the only time a scientist put themselves in danger from their own invention. In 1840, a physicist named Michael Faraday was working on a way to create artificial rain to help combat the water shortage in England. At the time, people believed that cholera was spread through contaminated water, so they desperately needed a way to make more clean water available to the public. Faraday's invention involved pumping water into the air using a large syringe, which would then cool and form clouds. And once those clouds reached a certain size, they could be electrically stimulated to produce rain. To test his invention, Faraday shot a massive amount of water high into the air using a giant syringe. Unfortunately, the water didn't turn into clouds. It fell back to the ground and soaked Faraday's assistant John Henry Pepper completely. But Faraday had one more trick up his sleeve. He then asked his assistant to stand under the massive lens of one of his mirrors and focus the sun's rays onto him, which started to burn Pepper's skin. Fortunately, he was able to beat back the flames using a blanket, but not before suffering third-degree burns on his face and hands. Sometimes science experiments go wrong for much more catastrophic reasons, though, like when a group of Soviet scientists accidentally created an artificial black hole. It happened in 1971, when physicists were attempting to recreate the conditions inside a star. By using a particle accelerator to fire 2 beams of subatomic particles at each other, they hoped to create a miniature star that would generate huge amounts of energy that could then be used to power everything from cars to homes. But instead of a star, they created a tiny black hole that was invisible to the naked eye. They tried to destroy it by firing gamma rays at it, but that just made it bigger. So they tried again by surrounding it with liquid nitrogen. But as the black hole grew, it sucked up all the nitrogen and began to devour the very fabric of space and time itself. Of course, sometimes science experiments go wrong for no reason at all. Just ask the French physicist Louis-Victor de Broglie. He was working on a relatively safe experiment that involved putting a metal plate over a beam of light. But in 1924, as he was adjusting his equipment, the lights went out, plunging the lab into darkness. When they turned the lights back on, he noticed that the beam of light had vanished and was replaced by a wall of fog. Naturally, he thought that he had made a mistake and turned the lights off and on again, expecting to see the beam reappear. But it never did. In fact, the beam never reappeared again until 3 weeks later, when de Broglie returned to his lab after taking a long weekend to relax. So, in an effort to find a replacement, scientists began testing a chemical called CFC-113A in refrigerators to see how well it could absorb heat, and the results were amazing. The CFC-113A was 50 times better at absorbing heat than the chemicals currently being used. But unfortunately, it also turned out to be extremely toxic to humans. Those who inhaled too much of the chemical lost consciousness and then died. But despite this, the chemical continued to be tested for several more years, until finally being banned in 1995. Well, now it is time for you to use your knowledge of science to avoid going down in history as one of the people whose experiment went wrong. Check out how to win a Nobel Prize. For more science experiments gone wrong, watch Most Insane Science Experiments, or click this other link for another video you'll like. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.